This is I don't think it's a rare thing of Charles to be speaking about his cancer treatment because he's been very, very open since he was diagnosed last February. And what we've had from the King is him wanting to sort of share his diagnosis, share some updates without being too explicit about it. And this
Just minutes ago, Buckingham Palace dropped a bombshell that nobody saw coming. King Charles's cancer battle has reached a point of no return. And what palace insiders are now revealing will leave you speechless. A secret letter hidden for decades has been opened, tearing the royal family apart from the inside. Queen Camilla's shocking reaction, William's power grab, and the one thing Charles confessed that changes everything.
From Bangladesh to Botswana, from Malta to Malaysia. You make us part of your story. You invite us to share your concerns and your passions, and you eloquently express the power of our commonwealth.
What they're hiding from you is far worse than anyone imagined. You need to hear this before it's too late. The announcement came unexpectedly, catching even seasoned royal correspondents off guard. Within minutes of the statement's release, crowds began gathering outside Buckingham Palace. People stood in stunned silence, some openly weeping, others embracing strangers as the weight of the news settled over them. The atmosphere was thick with disbelief and worry. Television crews scrambled to secure positions near the palace gates as helicopters circled overhead, their cameras capturing the growing assembly of concerned citizens below. What made this announcement particularly striking was its timing. According to sources familiar with palace operations, this statement was not part of any planned communication strategy. Something had changed overnight, forcing the communications team to act far more quickly than they had anticipated. The rushed nature of the announcement only added to the sense that the situation had taken a serious turn, one that could no longer be managed through the usual careful choreography of royal public relations. The wording of the official statement was measured but carried unmistakable gravity. Palace officials spoke not only about the king's health, but also about the continued strength and stability of the monarchy itself. Experienced royal watchers immediately recognized this language as significant. It was the kind of phrasing typically reserved for moments when the institution needs to reassure the public that despite personal difficulties affecting the monarch, the crown remains secure. One detail that did not escape notice was the absence of Queen Camilla during the announcement. Throughout Charles's reign, she has been a constant presence at his side, particularly during important public moments. Her conspicuous absence at such a critical juncture raised immediate questions among observers and palace insiders alike. Some wondered if she was simply overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation, while others speculated about deeper reasons for her absence from what was clearly a watershed moment for the royal family. The events leading up to this announcement paint a picture of mounting concern within palace walls. According to multiple sources close to the royal household, the previous night at Balmoral had been anything but routine. What began as a standard medical checkup quickly evolved into something far more serious. The king's personal physician had noticed subtle changes that prompted immediate concern, leading to a series of urgent tests conducted well into the evening hours. As results came back, the atmosphere inside Balmoral reportedly shifted from calm to crisis mode. Senior palace aides began receiving encrypted messages on their phones, marked with the highest priority. The king's medical team placed emergency calls, activating protocols that are reserved only for the most serious situations. Within hours, key members of the royal family were being contacted and asked to make their way to Balmoral as quickly and discreetly as possible. Prince William was among the first to be notified. Sources indicate that he received a direct call from one of his father's closest confidants in the middle of the night. The tone of that conversation was described as unusually grave, prompting William to prepare for an immediate journey north. He understood from that single phone call that this was not a routine family matter, but something that required his urgent presence and attention. Queen Camilla was contacted shortly after William. Those familiar with the situation describe her initial reaction as one of measured shock, as though she had long prepared herself for difficult news, but had never truly expected it to arrive so suddenly. She reportedly requested a direct line to the king's medical team before retreating into private contemplation, leaving palace staff uncertain about her next steps or emotional state. Princess Anne's arrival at Balmoral was characteristically understated. Unlike other members of the family, she did not require elaborate security arrangements or formal protocols. She simply appeared, slipping in quietly as she has done during previous family crises over the years. However, those who saw her that night noted something unusual. Anne, known for her stoic demeanor and unshakable composure, appeared visibly affected by whatever she had learned. For someone who rarely shows emotion in public or private, this was a telling sign of just how serious the situation had become. By 3 a.m, the palace had fully activated its emergency communication protocols. This rarely used system, designed specifically for moments of national significance, involves coordination between medical teams, senior advisors, legal experts, and communication strategists. Draft statements were prepared, though none were intended to be released so quickly. Security around Balmoral was quietly but significantly increased. Entry and exit logs were sealed, and staff members were reminded of their confidentiality obligations. The world outside remained completely unaware that behind those ancient walls, the royal family was facing one of its most challenging moments in recent history. While most of Britain slept, a parallel drama was unfolding in hushed conversations and hurried footsteps along Balmoral's corridors. Medical professionals conferred in low voices. Senior aides made careful notes. Family members arrived one by one, their faces etched with concern. This was not simply a health scare or a temporary setback. Those present understood they were witnessing a pivotal moment, one that would have lasting implications not just for King Charles personally, but for the entire institution of the monarchy. Every decision made that night, every word spoken, every action taken, was done with the awareness that the consequences would ripple far beyond those immediate hours. The morning brought no relief, only the difficult task of informing the nation. The statement that emerged was the product of those intense overnight hours, carefully crafted to convey the seriousness of the situation, while attempting to maintain a sense of stability and continuity. Yet despite the careful language, the underlying message was clear. King Charles faces a significant health challenge, one that has reached a point where silence was no longer an option. In the immediate aftermath of the announcement, Queen Camilla's response became a subject of intense speculation among palace insiders. Rather than appearing alongside other senior royals or issuing her own statement of support, she withdrew completely from public view. Staff members who encountered her during those critical hours described a woman grappling with an overwhelming mixture of emotions. She retreated to her private quarters and remained there for an extended period, refusing most visitors and declining to engage with the coordinated response that was being organized by palace officials. Those who had access to the private areas of the residence reported hearing her pacing restlessly, the sound of her footsteps echoing through otherwise silent corridors. On at least one occasion, staff members overheard what sounded like muffled crying, though Camilla has always been careful to maintain her composure in front of others. Some aides recalled seeing her seated at her desk, writing what appeared to be personal letters in her distinctive handwriting, though the intended recipients of these letters remain unknown. For those familiar with royal history, Camilla's behavior during this crisis bore striking similarities to her reaction following Princess Diana's death decades earlier. During that traumatic period, she also withdrew from public view, caught between personal grief and uncertainty about her role in the unfolding events. Back then, she was a figure operating largely in the shadows, her relationship with Charles not yet publicly acknowledged in the way it is today. Now, however, the stakes are considerably higher. As Queen Consort, her position carries official weight and responsibility, making her absence during such a critical moment all the more noticeable. Palace sources suggest that Camilla's withdrawal was driven by more than simple grief over her husband's deteriorating health. There was reportedly a growing anxiety about what his illness might mean for her own position within the royal hierarchy. Throughout her years alongside Charles, she has worked carefully to establish her legitimacy and acceptance within an institution that initially viewed her with suspicion. Her role has been built almost entirely around Charles's presence and authority. The prospect of him being unable to fulfill his duties raised uncomfortable questions about whether the palace would continue to rally around her or begin shifting its focus toward the younger generation. Within palace corridors, whispers began circulating about a potential statement that Camilla was considering releasing independently of the official palace communications. The idea reportedly involved a personal message expressing her anguish over the king's condition, something that would speak directly to the public in her own voice, rather than through the filtered language of official statements. For traditional palace courtiers, this idea was almost unthinkable. It represented a significant departure from established protocol and suggested a potential fracture between the queen consort and the institutional machinery that typically controls all royal messaging. While the statement never materialized, the fact that it was even discussed reveals the depth of Camilla's emotional turmoil and her uncertainty about how to navigate the crisis. It also highlighted tensions that were beginning to emerge between different factions within the palace. Some advisors remained loyal to Camilla and sympathetic to her position, while others were already beginning to look toward the future and the inevitable transition that would center around Prince William. Speaking of William, his response to the crisis stood in stark contrast to Camilla's withdrawal. Within hours of learning about his father's condition, he had begun convening meetings at Kensington Palace with senior advisors and communication strategists. These were not symbolic gatherings meant to project calm. According to those present, they were substantive working sessions focused on ensuring continuity and stability during an uncertain time. William's demeanor during these meetings was notably different from his usual approach. He was decisive, focused, and demonstrated a command of the situation that surprised even experienced palace staff. For the first time, people within the royal household began describing William's behavior as distinctly king-like. He wasn't simply fulfilling the role of concerned son or supportive heir. He was actively taking charge, making decisions, and setting the tone for how the monarchy would respond to the unfolding crisis. His instructions to his team were clear and direct. They needed to prepare comprehensive communication strategies that would work regardless of how the king's health situation developed in the coming days and weeks. Underlying William's actions was something more personal than mere duty. Those close to him indicate that he spent considerable time during this period reflecting on his mother, Princess Diana, and the hopes she had expressed for him during her lifetime. Diana had always envisioned William as a modernizing force within the monarchy, someone who would bring the institution closer to ordinary people while maintaining its dignity and relevance. Friends of the prince suggest that these private memories and promises made long ago have been guiding his approach during this difficult time. However, not everyone within the palace welcomed William's assertiveness. Advisors loyal to Queen Camilla began expressing discomfort with what they perceived as the prince overstepping boundaries that had not yet been formally crossed. The primary point of friction centered on control of the narrative surrounding the king's health. William advocated for transparency and proactive communication with the public, believing that honesty would ultimately strengthen trust in the monarchy. Camilla's circle, by contrast, preferred a more cautious approach that would protect the king's privacy and avoid speculation about worst-case scenarios. This divergence in strategy laid bare an uncomfortable reality. Two distinct power centers were emerging within the palace, each with its own priorities and vision for how to manage the crisis. It was subtle at first, manifesting in disagreements over messaging or scheduling. But as days passed, the division became more apparent. Staff members found themselves navigating carefully between these competing camps, aware that their loyalties might soon be tested in ways they had not anticipated. King Charles himself appeared to recognize what was happening. According to palace insiders, he made a deliberate decision to grant William unprecedented authority over certain communication decisions. This transfer of influence happened quietly, through private conversations rather than official announcements. It was as though Charles understood that his son needed to begin shouldering greater responsibility, not at some distant future date, but immediately. This quiet handover of certain powers represented both a practical necessity and an emotional moment for both father and son. The shift in dynamics began to manifest in public appearances as well. William and Catherine, the Princess of Wales, became noticeably more visible and central to royal activities. Their engagements increased in frequency and significance. Every public appearance seemed carefully calibrated to send a message of stability and continuity. They represented the future of the monarchy, and that future was being presented to the public with increasing prominence. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, King Charles was dealing with realities that went far beyond palace politics. His medical team had delivered a prognosis that left little room for optimism. Faced with this devastating news, Charles made the decision to confide in two people he trusted above all others. He summoned Princess Anne and a longtime aide who had served him with unwavering loyalty for decades. What transpired in that private meeting would have profound implications for everything that followed. The three of them gathered in the king's personal study, a room that had witnessed countless important discussions over the years. But this conversation was different. According to those with knowledge of what occurred, Charles spoke with unusual candor about his fears, his regrets, and his hopes for what would come after him. He talked about unfinished business, particularly regarding promises made to Princess Diana that circumstances had prevented him from fully honoring. He expressed concern about Camilla's future, acknowledging that without his presence, her position might become vulnerable in ways the public did not fully understand. Then Charles mentioned something that had been the subject of speculation for years, but never confirmed. He referenced a letter he had written long ago, a document intended to provide guidance during exactly this kind of crisis. This letter, reportedly drafted in the emotionally turbulent period following Diana's death, contained his personal thoughts about succession and the preservation of the monarchy. Some believed it was a contingency plan, created during a time of deep reflection about mortality and legacy. Others thought it might have been updated more recently to reflect his evolving perspective as king. The existence of this letter had been whispered about in royal circles for years, but its contents remained a closely guarded secret. Now, in this moment of crisis, Charles was acknowledging its existence to those he trusted most. Shortly after this emotional conversation, the letter was quietly retrieved from the royal archives. The request came through discreet channels, with strict instructions about who should be informed and who should have access to its contents. Princess Anne emerged from that meeting visibly shaken. Staff members who saw her described something they had almost never witnessed before. Tears streamed down her face as she walked through the corridors. For a woman known throughout her life for extraordinary composure and emotional restraint, this display of grief spoke volumes about the gravity of what had been discussed behind those closed doors. The retrieval of the letter from the royal archives set off a chain of events that would fundamentally alter the dynamics within the palace. This was not a document that could be casually reviewed and filed away again. Its very existence demanded action, and its contents, once revealed to a select group of senior advisors and privy councilors, created ripples that quickly became waves. The letter was delivered only to those deemed absolutely essential to know its contents. Prince William was among this exclusive circle, along with legal advisors and the most senior members of the Privy Council. What made this letter so consequential was not simply that it existed, but what it reportedly contained. According to sources with knowledge of its contents, the document went far beyond procedural instructions or standard contingency planning. It was deeply personal, reflecting Charles's innermost thoughts during one of the darkest periods of his life. Written in the aftermath of Diana's death, it captured his fears about the future, his regrets about the past, and his vision for how the monarchy should navigate moments of crisis. More significantly, the letter outlined specific preferences regarding succession and the distribution of authority should Charles become incapacitated. Those who have seen the document describe language that strongly suggests Charles wanted William to assume the role of acting sovereign far earlier than traditional protocols would typically allow. The reasoning, as expressed in the letter, centered on stability and public confidence. Charles believed that in times of uncertainty, the monarchy's survival depended on presenting a clear, unambiguous line of authority, and he saw his eldest son as the figure best positioned to provide that assurance. For Queen Camilla, the revelation of this letter's contents came as a profound shock. Sources close to her indicate that she had been completely unaware of its full implications until this moment. While she had always assumed that Charles's support would secure her position during any health crisis, the letter painted a very different picture. It suggested that even as Charles fought publicly to establish her place within the monarchy, his private instructions placed primary emphasis on William's role as the stabilizing force during transitional periods. The discovery triggered immediate tensions within the royal household. Camilla's reaction was described by those who witnessed it as a combination of hurt and anger. She felt excluded from what was arguably the most important decision of Charles's reign, a decision that directly affected her future. For someone who had spent years carefully building her legitimacy within an institution that initially resisted her, this felt like a betrayal, intentional or not. Hastily arranged private meetings followed, and these gatherings were far from the composed, dignified affairs the public might imagine. Voices were raised behind closed doors, tears were shed, long suppressed frustrations bubbled to the surface as different factions within the family confronted the reality that their interests were not as aligned as they had pretended. The fragile unity that had held the royal household together through various controversies and challenges began showing serious cracks. William, for his part, maintained a calm and measured demeanor throughout these confrontations. Those present during the tense discussions describe him as unshakable in his conviction that his father's written wishes should be honored. This was not the hesitant or deferential prince of earlier years. He spoke with the confidence of someone who understood that history was pushing him forward, whether he felt entirely ready or not. His acknowledgement of the letter came not with surprise, but with a sense of inevitability, as though some part of him had always known this moment would arrive. Princess Anne attempted to mediate between the competing camps, but her own loyalties were clear. She had been present when Charles made his emotional confession and revealed the existence of the letter. That experience had affected her deeply, cementing her commitment to ensuring that her brother's wishes were respected. While she worked to keep family discussions civil and productive, her alignment with William's position was unmistakable. Her support lent the heir's stance a legitimacy that even Camilla's most devoted allies found difficult to challenge. The divisions within the family soon spread to the palace staff. Employees who had worked together for years found themselves on opposite sides of an invisible line. Some remained loyal to Camilla, particularly longtime aides who had supported her through years of public scrutiny and gradual acceptance. Others gravitated toward William's camp, seeing him as both the inevitable future and the necessary present. Younger staff members in particular tended to view the prince as representing the kind of monarchy that could survive and thrive in the modern era. These factional divisions manifested in subtle but significant ways. Information flow became selective. Memos were shared with some, but not others. Meetings were scheduled without including certain key figures. The atmosphere within the palace shifted from collaborative to cautious, with everyone carefully considering their words and actions in light of how they might be interpreted by one camp or the other. Inevitably, some of this internal tension began leaking to the press. Journalists with long-cultivated palace sources started receiving carefully worded tips about disagreements over succession planning and disputes about the queen consort's role going forward. Some media reports portrayed Camilla sympathetically, as someone blindsided by circumstances beyond her control. Others framed William as the determined leader the monarchy needed during turbulent times. Each leak deepened the atmosphere of mistrust within the palace, as people wondered who was speaking to journalists and why. Against this backdrop of internal turmoil, preparations for a public address by King Charles moved forward. The decision to have the king speak directly to the nation was not made lightly. Palace officials understood that his appearance would be scrutinized for every nuance, every word choice, every visible sign of his condition. But they also recognized that the public deserved to hear from the monarch himself, not simply through official statements filtered through spokespeople. When Charles finally appeared before the cameras, the impact was immediate and profound. This was not the formal, distant figure that royal protocol typically presents. Instead, the nation saw a man confronting his own mortality with remarkable honesty. His voice carried weight, but also vulnerability. He spoke directly about his health challenges, acknowledging their seriousness without dwelling on clinical details. He emphasized his gratitude for the medical care he was receiving and the support of his family. But what truly captured hearts across the country and around the world was the personal nature of his reflections. Charles spoke about legacy, about the values he hoped to leave behind, about the importance of family and continuity. Most movingly, he spoke about Diana. For decades, her name had been largely absent from his public remarks, a ghost hovering over his life but rarely acknowledged directly. Now, with nothing left to lose and everything to clarify, he spoke of her with tenderness and respect. He acknowledged her enduring influence, particularly on their sons, and expressed pride in the kind of man William had become. The mention of William was deliberate and significant. Charles referred to his eldest son as a pillar of strength and spoke about his increasing responsibilities in guiding the monarchy forward. To anyone listening carefully, this was more than a father praising his child. It was a monarch publicly acknowledging the transition that was already underway, even if not yet formalized through official channels. The public response was overwhelming. Social media platforms filled with messages of support and sympathy. Vigils sprang up spontaneously outside royal residences, with people leaving flowers, candles, and handwritten notes expressing their feelings. Even those who had been critical of Charles during various controversies found themselves moved by the authenticity of his address. It transcended political divisions and historical grievances, touching something fundamental in the collective consciousness. Yet beneath the emotional resonance of that speech lay a harder reality. Charles's words, while heartfelt, also carried an undertone of farewell. His tone suggested someone preparing not just for medical treatment, but for a broader transition. He was, in effect, beginning the process of letting go, doing so with dignity, but also with clear-eyed acceptance of what lay ahead. In the days following the address, William and Catherine's public profile rose even further. Their appearances became more frequent and more prominent. They were increasingly positioned as the face of royal stability and continuity. Every engagement was carefully choreographed to send a message of confidence and capability. The couple represented not just the future, but the present, stepping into a spotlight that was steadily shifting away from Charles and Camilla. Behind the scenes, serious discussions were taking place about governance and authority. The Privy Council held confidential sessions to review protocols for potential regency arrangements. Parliamentary officials quietly consulted constitutional experts about various scenarios. No formal announcements were made, but the mere fact that these conversations were happening indicated how seriously the situation was being taken at the highest levels of government. Meanwhile, rumors continued to circulate about an impending formal decree that would clarify roles and responsibilities within the royal household. Some speculated it would address succession procedures. Others believed it might redefine the queen consort's position. What united all this speculation was a sense that a major announcement was coming, something that would provide concrete answers to the questions consuming public attention. The monarchy stood at a genuine crossroads, caught between honoring tradition and adapting to unprecedented circumstances, between the reign that was ending and the one that was beginning.